Hello and welcome to episode number 64 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Now today, Gar, this is going to be a fun one because we're going to be looking back on the history of one of our all-time favorite TV game shows. And of course, I'm talking about the Newlywed Game. Now, Gar, before I even get started, I got to ask you, what is the one kind of thing you probably remember most about that show?
Make a whoopie.
Yeah, there you go. And I mean, that was one of the first catchphrases in TV before shows really started having catchphrases. And what was so unique about it, I remember being a very young child at the time, and I always heard the host Bob Eubanks say, where's the very first place you and your wife ever made whoopie? And I'd ask my mom and dad, what is whoopie? What's he talking about? Never mind. Just watch the show. Well, of course, when we grew up, we learned to know. I mean, it was another word for kind of sexual intercourse or sex, because back then the TV censors were so sensitive that you couldn't even say something like making love, and so they had to find a unique way to do it, and amazingly Bob Eubanks was able to do that,
Well, my guess, it's only a guess,
yeah.
But I'm guessing that when this actually occurred and they people used it for the first time, making whoopee, what it did is it sparked an interest from the audience, and I'm sure that there was a spike in ratings and things like that because of the interest. Because at that time, see, nowadays we look at it and it's out of context. Only people that are older, like me, will remember this. But it was a time when you didn't talk about things like that, and it was a touchy area, and networks had to bow to the censors, because the censors were like watchdogs for anything, so it was a completely different time period where things were completely different in sex and the social acceptability of talking about sex. And because of that, it created a spike in the ratings, which prompted the show to make it something that became a regular part of the show.
Yeah, and the censorship was such a big thing on TV back in the day that so much what we're talking about, besides just what you could and couldn't do. I mean, if a TV show would dare kind of do something daring, not only would they risk maybe even the show being canceled, but you'd have advertisers say, "Oh no, okay, we're not going to sponsor your show anymore," and then that's how the show gets made and put on TV. And without sponsors, that could lead to a show being canceled, or you got to really rush and try to find another sponsor.
Well, and back in those days, the sponsors, which were the products and the commercials, they wielded a lot more power back then. So when they said that they were going to poll, it had a lot more impact than it does now, because there is so much more products. Somebody pulls, there's going to be somebody just ready to jump in and replace them.
Sure.
So it was a very different landscape, and that's why I want to bring that up, is because, that's the beauty of the time machine is to look, for people to look at how things are socially now compared to how they were then.
Oh, sure. And of course, just to kind of go back in our time machine to 1966, when the Newlywed Game premiered, and kind of give people a picture of what the landscape was like, and what exactly the Newlywed Game is. The Newlywed Game, Gar, of course, is an American TV game show that premiered on ABC television on July 11th, 1966, and the final show ran on December 20th, 1974. And of course, the premise of the Newlywed Game is where newlywed couples would compete against one another and they'd be asked, questions about one another to see how well they really knew their mate. And of course, the interesting thing in doing the research, as always, is I found out that, believe it or not, some of the people that appeared on the show would end up getting divorced as a result of just appearing on the show and the way the husband or wife answered the question, because they asked some far out questions,
Well, but then I could definitely see that happening.
Yeah.
Because times were so different, and it would be a lot more impactful of those type of answers back then than it would in having those kind of answers today.
Yeah.
So it was, when things like that would happen, because that was the beauty of the show was the rifts between the husbands and the wives, because of the person expecting that their partner's going to answer differently, and then when they answer like in a way that's from left field. It could change the directory of how they think about their relationship.
Yeah, in fact, in watching the show, another fun aspect was you'd almost die for the couple to give for each the husband and wife to give like an incorrect answer, because that is where usually the laughter would start, coming on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you almost wanted them to give like an incorrect answer, and that was kind of a big part of the show. That's where the laughter would typically break out. And of course, Bob Eubanks was famous for right on the spot being able to come up with those one-line zingers,
Well, yes. And that's what kept everybody riveted, was because of, this, part of it was the anticipation, going on in your mind as to what they should be answering. And then what actually comes out of their mouth, you know what I mean? And that just, endeared the audience to watching the show. It was part of, the angst of hearing the answer and the reactions of the audience hearing the answers, but also, it was also part of the anticipation. What are they going to say?
Yes. And, of course, another interesting fact I learned was that the Newlywed Game, Gar, was created by Robert Allen Nicholson, who was an American musician and actor who was best known, get this, prior to the Newlywed Game, for his appearances on, of all things, the Howdy Doody Show. And Roger E. Moore was the co-creator. The Newlywed Game was originally produced by Chuck Barris, of course, we've heard that name before, who would go on to become a major force in the TV industry, having also been known for also creating the dating game and going on to host the popular Gong Show, which we've done an episode on. And again, he was very successful. But what's interesting about Chuck Barris's involvement in the Newlywed Game, he'd also, by the time we get to the end of this episode, you're going to find out he played a major role in a major controversy in why the Newlywed Game would be canceled.
I wouldn't doubt that. He was kind of a racy dude.
He was the Howard Stern of the time.
He was a little bit of a handful for the networks.
Yeah. And then, in fact, it was in 1966 when Bob Eubanks received a call from TV producer Chuck Barris, who asked Bob Eubanks to become the MC. Not the host, the MC, Masters of Ceremony, which used to call the host of the show, for the new game show, of course, called the Newlywed Game. And Bob Eubanks, who had previously been a radio DJ, was chosen to host the Newlywed Game, Gar, because he was only 28 years old at the time, which allowed Bob Eubanks to bring a very youthful energy to the show, which I think was really present for most of the show's original run.
Well, and that's a really good point, because it was the 60s, and that was a big focus for TV back in those times, because, you look at all, the Partridge Family and the Monkees and all of this stuff that was going on TV that was targeting the teenage audience. So that was, you really hit the head on the nail on that one.
Yeah, and again, like we said, during his time hosting the Newlywed Game, Bob Eubanks was known for using the catchphrase "making whoopie," which Eubanks used in reference to sexual intercourse, so that parents at home with kids wouldn't have to explain the facts of life to their kids.
Well, it would bring up the question anyways, just like you did with your parents.
Yeah. ABC was okay with the use of making love. Its standards and practices did not allow, however, for the use of the word panties, if you can believe that. That was a big thing, I guess, back in the day. You can use the word panties anywhere on TV.
Well, it was a very see, I was living during that time, I was witnessing the difficulty of people being able to have conversations, and if these things came up in the conversation, immediately the conversation became awkward.
Yeah.
And that was just the way it was back in the 60s, when I was a young child and I would witness these things. And, so that is the same influence that was going on with TV, things that we, don't even think twice about now.
Yeah.
Back then were a huge deal. I mean, I cannot even stress, the people that are my age that witness the same thing will know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a very different time where these things there was a very social acceptability or unacceptability about those topics at that time.
Yeah, and let's talk for a minute, Gar. In general, when you talk about a game show too, you got to talk about the prizes. And the Newlywed Game had very unique prizes. It wasn't your typical game show in a lot of ways, so you did not win the typical prizes, because these were people that were newly, just recently married. Some of the prizes would range from everything from a brand new living room furniture set for over $1,000, and stuff like a brand new kitchen set, a refrigerator and kitchen table, and they give you the value and all that. And sometimes they'd even say, we're going to give the winning couple a honeymoon vacation. And the prizes were very kind of all over the place, but specifically for what maybe a newlywed couple would need assistance maybe getting, financially, they'd be awarded these type of prizes.
Well, and that's another unique thing about the show. You look at it, and the closest you have, to those kind of things are like The Price is Right.
Yeah. And can you imagine a brand new living room set for worth $1,000? I guess back in the 60s and 70s, $1,000 living room set seemed like very expensive.
Well, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
Back in the 1960s, not a large house.
Yeah.
A one-story, 3-bedroom house with maybe 2 bathrooms was selling for about $20,000.
Wow.
So when you think $1,000 for a living room set, that's a
shitload of money.
Yeah. I was going to say a curse word.
Yeah.
That's a large amount of money.
Yeah.
But you have to look at it in context.
Yeah.
Because that is how much inflation has grown since the 1960s.
Wow.
Is a house, a normal, just a a regular family's house, not a super big one, but just, a normal family house. Yeah. It was selling for about $15,000-$20,000.
And here's another fun fact I learned about Bob Eubanks that I never knew. It said, while hosting the Newlywed Game, Gar, Bob Eubanks also had a career in all things, if you can believe this, the country music business, where he managed country artists such as Dolly Parton, Barbara Mandrell, and Marty Robbins.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That is a beautiful gem there, buddy.
Yeah,
you just pulled a really golden one out.
Yeah. Wow. And so it said that, the Newlywed Game show ended its original run in 1974 after filming 2,195 episodes. I mean, that's a lot of episodes at the time, which made Bob Eubanks one of the most viewed game show hosts at that time. In 1974, when the show came to an end, the Newlywed Game had been on the air for nearly 8.5 years, Gar, and at that time, the Newlywed Game had been the longest running game show on ABC until 1985, when, of course, the Family Feud surpassed it, having been on TV at that point for 9 years.
That's huge, because that's also, the population wasn't as large as it is.
Yeah.
It's really kind of mind-boggling to look, at all of these things, because this is all going on back in the 1960s, which is, that the hippie generation time period and everything like that. And when I was a kid and I was, watching these shows, to me, the Newlywed show, seemed so similar to the Dating Game. And because now, finding out that they're both
produced by
Chuck Barris Productions, it totally makes sense, because, say, for example, the Newlywed Game had its elements that could go into uncomfortable areas. But the Dating Game was all about going into uncomfortable areas.
Well, see,
but not about sexuality, because it was dating. And back in the 1960s, sexuality and dating was a massive taboo.
Yeah, and Gar,
taboo.
Yeah, I will tell you, Gar, I do see a future episode where we're going to have to do one on the Dating Game, obviously, because it obviously became before the Newlywed Game. But the thing with the Dating Game was, of course, like you said, the biggest difference is that you had like 3 guys or 3 girls competing to get a date with the same person. And, of course, the person that they're ultimately trying to get their dream date with has the ultimate decision. Okay, which one of these people gave the best answer? I'm going to pick the person that I think gave the best answers. Okay, so that's the biggest difference. And then the Newlywed Games, not so much you're competing to go on a date, but it's these couples that are recently married, and the whole premise behind the game is, how well do you really know your mate? And let's talk a little bit about being an audience member as far as watching the show, at your house, at your home, when you're watching it on TV. I remember watching the Newlywed Game, Gar, for example, and immediately you like maybe one of the husbands, or think he's a jerk, or wife, she's a real, based on the answers or the reactions they get. And so right away, there are people that you immediately like and dislike. And then as Bob Eubanks is asking each of them the question, you're kind of thinking, I remember, like, I would give an answer, this is what I would say, or you wonder, I wonder what he's going to say, and you try to figure it out before the answer was given.
Yes, the anticipation.
Yeah.
That it was kind of what I was getting at. It that's part of it. That whole, you, the person at home, thinking, and then also, to kind of go on to what you were saying about, I think a better description of the show is, how well can you throw your mate under the bus?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there was a lot of times that you watch that show, and there were times that you just got the feeling, oh, this marriage is not going to work out.
Yeah, and then a lot of the times too, and you got to remember back in the '60s and '70s when this originally, was on TV, times were very different. Wasn't so much about. You go girl and girl power. A lot of it, the wives were still expected to stay home, and if you had a wife that wanted to go out and get a job, she was really considered a rebel, if you know what I mean. And so a lot of times these, like when the wives would go backstage and the husbands were left to give the answers, a lot of these guys would kind of, like almost male bonding. These guys, these two or three husbands getting together and clowning on their wives and like having a good time at it, and then when the wives come back and they find out what the husband said, oh my god.
I mean, this is long before the term throw under the bus.
Yeah.
That's just the best way to describe it, is because, and it's not on purpose. People are not on purpose throwing their mate under the bus. They're actually doing it by being honest or accidentally, or thinking that they're going to be saying something that might be, construed as cool.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
There's a lot of that.
There's just, there's that element, there's that element of what's going to go wrong.
Yeah, there was a certain element of that to the show, but there's another part of the show is this, the reactions. And what I'm talking about is like, first of all, like you're saying, when one person will be trying to come, a lot of the contestants will be trying to come up with, first of all, as crazy, zany, funny, but trying to be like the class clown, like I'm going to say something funny and off the wall. And that was part of a thing about the Newlywed Game, is how people answered the questions. Typically, most of the contestants, they didn't want to just give a simple answer. They wanted to come up with something kind of funny, but get everybody, get the crowd laughing. Because again, it was done also before a live audience, I'm pretty sure. And so to get the people laughing, a lot of times the contestants would think, I'm going to say something crazy. And then the fun part was when the people that were backstage come back and they try to guess what their mate said, and oftentimes they would give them like, just not even say anything, but give them this like just awful stare. Like you knew, okay,
yes.
when that guy got home, he was sleeping on the couch. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, yes, there was, and that was the effect on the audience. It's just the audience witnessing all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think game shows allowed TV to discover that when you have unpredictability, that really draws in audiences. And that's the unpredictability about what is their mate going to say.
And that's what made the show fresh, too, because it was one of those shows that I think is really kind of, for the most part, unscripted, in the sense that the host would throw out these funny, zingers and stuff to get the crowd laughing, but then you never really knew what the contestants were going to say, and that's why every episode of a Newlywed Game wasn't exactly the same, because people are different, and so depending on who the contestants are, maybe you have a real funny night, or maybe you have a real boring night. It just kind of depends on who the contestants were,
Yeah, and I have to be honest. In retrospect, you look back, and the true stars of the show were the contestants.
Yeah, and how sad though is it, Gar, to think that some of these couples went on the show. You'd imagine just for laughs and to have a good time. It's something fun to do, and to think that people actually got divorced after appearing on the show. I mean, that's just one of those things that, wow.
Well, and that just goes back to what I was saying. It's just because there were things that would happen on that show that were, by today's standards, we'd like do an eye roll. You know what I mean? It's so non-consequential. But back then, it was socially devastating.
Sure.
And literally socially devastating. That is how different the public's outlook was on these topics and these issues, things that were happening. You know what I mean, on the show.
Yeah, and let's talk too, Gar, about the place the Newlywed Game has in pop culture today, because I will tell you, just last year, I went on a cruise like to Spain and throughout Europe, and here's the fun part. I did not know till I got on the cruise. They had, one night we were able to attend, they actually had a mocked version of a Newlywed Game on the cruise ship, where the cruise director was, of course, the host, and they took volunteers from the audience who wants to appear on our version of a Newlywed Game, and they picked 3 couples, and it was basically what you would have seen back in the day on the TV show, and it was kind of fun because just the participating in the audience and laughing and trying to, just laughing at what people were saying. It was a real fun thing, but that when they start having like mocked versions of a game show on, and the same thing, like they had mocked up version also like a Deal or No Deal on a cruise ship. That shows you that these game shows like really kind of resonated with people.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. They're creating offshoot lives of their own. Yeah. So that doesn't happen unless something becomes iconic, doesn't become a huge part of pop culture.
Okay, Gar, and then we're going to get into now the controversy involving producer Chuck Barris that kind of led to the original version of the Newlywed Game getting canceled. Okay, it said a syndicated version of the show aired from 1977, so it came back like from 1977 to 1980. When the show ended, it was canceled after a controversy that involved Newlywed Game producer Chuck Barris. It said a Newlywed Game show spinoff called Three's a Crowd. The show centered around a man, his wife, and his secretary with implications of adultery. The show was successful, but ABC canceled the show because of the huge controversy with the Three's a Crowd show.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was not aware of this, but when you just told me about it, the first thing that came to my mind is that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
That is not a good idea.
And then,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and then let me tell you, Gar, not only did this little controversy surrounding Chuck Barris, not only did it bring an end to the Newlywed Game, but check this out. It said, because of the huge controversy with the Three's a Crowd show, as a result of the controversy that followed the Three's a Crowd game show, producer Chuck Barris' reputation, as you can imagine, it was ruined, and it canceled all of Chuck Barris' produced shows, which included the Newlywed Game, the Dating Game, and, of course, the Gong Show. Now, it almost kind of makes you wonder why they wouldn't have tried to fire the producer and get a new host or get a new producer, but then you think, well, maybe he owned the show, so that probably had a big part to do with it.
Probably did.
Yeah.
So he probably that option probably wasn't open. Otherwise, I think they probably would have taken it. You know what I mean? But he was quite the handful. I think he was dabbling in some.
Chemicals
substances
and
things like that during the time. He was also known for telling outlandish lies. But lies about himself being a hitman, secret agent. Things of that nature. I think they even made a movie about his, that whole ridiculous story about him being a hitman, secret agent. That whole thing. Yeah.
In fact, like I said, Gar, we did an episode on the Gong Show, and very much like what we just went with this controversy, I think another thing that happened around the same time on the Gong Show, the Gong Show was also pulled in addition to this because of the fact that on the last episode of the Gong Show, they had what was called the popsicle incident. And I'll just tell people, if you want to know what we're talking about, go on YouTube and type in like the Gong Show, the popsicle incident. And I can't even explain, just very inappropriate sexual innuendo stuff going on live TV, and I think on that last edition of the Gong Show, which must have been around the same time as all this is going on, that's probably what put the final nail in Chuck Barris's career, because to see what he had going on the Gong Show with this popsicle incident, your eyes will not believe it. And I think it like faded to black right away from what I remember, and his career was over for the rest of his life.
Well, yeah, it was kind of a culture clash between the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and acceptability in society and things like that. And Chuck Barris, became, I think, he
infamous.
Became very successful, and he chose to kind of go down the sex, drugs, and rock and roll route. And that just was like oil and water for the television industry. He was thinking that he would be able to do these things that were, for him and obviously the crowd that he was associating with. He didn't see what was wrong with it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they were in the minority, and the majority had a major problem with it and completely shut him down.
I mean, he was kind of the Howard Stern before there was a Howard Stern. Except even Howard Stern never really did anything that outlandish. About as controversy Howard Stern ever got was creating the character Fart Man.
Yeah, but it's just he was. What I mean is Chuck Barris was, he was just dabbling into too many of the fun things, and they were affecting his decisions, and they were not good decisions.
And he's one of those guys I think wanted to see just how far he could push the envelope, and he pushed it as far as he could, But it's what ultimately would destroy him. And so, what's interesting about talking about Chuck Barris and the Newlywed Game, he of course was the producer, like we said, behind the Gong Show, the Newlywed Game, and the Dating Game is what ultimately came first. But we of course loved all those TV shows. We remember them fondly. But the producer would go out in a bang in a big way. Now, interestingly enough, years later, I think from 1985 to 1988, I was reading, Bob Eubanks came back for what was called the new Newlywed Game. It was the first time since like 1980 that the show had been on TV, and so it was kind of a second chance, a second run of a show. And he stayed there until 1988, and then he left and was replaced by then up and coming comedian Paul Rodriguez.
Well, it's funny because when they started the Newlywed Game show, he was Bob Eubanks was so young, and nobody knew who he was, and he was like this target for the young audience. Then when they do the show, they bring it back. Now it's completely the opposite. He represents more of an older generation. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's just kind of ironic, I guess you would say, not meaning one is better than the other or anything negative about this, but it's just, kind of ironic just to see how things just took its natural development. Yeah,
it's interesting too, but by the time he returns in 1985 to the show, like you said, he's almost like a TV veteran, a real... a guy that's been in the business all these years, and he's coming back. And a lot of times people really enjoy seeing people that they grew up, he's back on TV, I'm going to watch a Newlywed Game. And I even remember at the time, I used to love that show, I'm going to be watching that. Of course, they come back, and it's not exactly the same Newlywed. Yeah, I mean, you got the same original host, but it's a little different because they update the set. It looks a little different. It's instead of blue and white, it's now red, the set, and so it looks a little different. And Bob Eubanks, I think, did it long enough where he felt like, okay, I'm ready to retire from this. It's time to move on. Let somebody else do this. And they ran the Newlywed Game with a couple other hosts, but it finally, really ran its course. You can see like old episodes now on YouTube, or I think they run old episodes like on the the Game Show Network. Excuse me. So the Newlywed Game is still out there for people that weren't around at the time that want to kind of check out what we're talking about.
Well, but then, also, another thing that just pops in my mind is the Newlywed Game show was, it was smack dab in the 1960s when, 90% of the women that were out there were of the mentality that, of the old school mentality of women. You gotta find a man, gotta get married, gotta do this, gotta do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so this is during that time period where that was how things were going. This is how society operated, and so it was kind of unique because they were mixing something that was prim and proper, but at the same time having a little bit of an element where you could step into racy areas.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go back to something in the 70s like Happy Days, which is considered like all-American TV, classic American Family, the Cunninghams. I mean, I've been watching an episode where Mrs. C, of all things, wanted to go out and get a job, but Mr. C was told, Marion, no wife of mine is going to go out and get a job. You're supposed to stay home. Not exactly Archie Bunker, but at this, and Howard Cunningham's considered like America's dad, if you know what I mean. He would be considered
you just hit on something.
A male chauvinist today, you know what I mean?
You just hit on something.
Yeah.
In the 1950s, that is exactly how it was.
Yeah.
It was socially unacceptable for a woman to be working.
Yeah.
It literally was socially unacceptable. And women that did work were ostracized in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And people don't know about that. But you just hit on something. You were talking about something else.
Yeah.
But that's always my point about this, because I keep always going back to what is acceptable socially, because it's social acceptance or social unacceptance that actually determines which things become pop culture icons.
Yeah.
Because there are certain elements of society that will keep something from being iconic, but then also allow other things to be iconic. You don't see what I'm saying? So how people interact socially has everything to do with feeding pop culture what it always turns out to be, and it's never a planned thing. It's never a thing where you have any anything controlling. It's all random, and it takes its own shapes and forms as to what becomes socially acceptable and what becomes not socially acceptable. And people just do not realize that back in the 1950s, it was majorly unacceptable for a woman to have a job and be working.
Yeah, and and I bring that up too, Gar, because in looking back on the history of the Newlywed Game, I mean, I think you, me, and a lot of people, when we think of the Newlywed Game, automatically Bob Eubanks is the face of the show. He's the one we think of. He was the one telling those one-liners, zingers, and making us laugh. And so they've had other hosts, like I said, like Paul Rodriguez. But I'll be honest, when Paul Rodriguez came on and he took over the hosting duties, I watched the show. But to me, it just wasn't the same. I missed seeing Bob Eubanks. And nothing against Paul Rodriguez, but whoever they got to take over the hosting duties, they were never going to be Bob Eubanks, if you know what I mean. And
yes.
And that's why he's he's the one people immediately think. And even though Chuck Barris, like I said, was a huge force in the TV industry for many, many years, sadly, because of the way his career went down and the things he did, a lot of people that were associated with the Newlywed Games, they, for example, of a dating game, they don't even want to bring his name up, sadly. And so those shows are still remembered, but people don't want to associate with Chuck Barris. So that's a great example why we will always think of Bob Eubanks as the Newlywed Game, if you know what I mean.
Yes, and I'm one of them too. When it's one of the first things that pops in my head when I think of the Newlywed Game is Bob Eubanks.
And talking too about the Newlywed Game, and doing the research, also the fact that the show premiered in 1966. I went online today to post a photo of a Newlywed Game on our Facebook page and came across a black and white photo. So I come to find out, when the show first premiered, like a lot of classic TV shows, Gar, it premiered as a black and white show, and then of course over the course of time it transitioned to like all the other classic TV shows to color. And I imagine, being somebody that was a fan of a Newlywed Game from 1966, the minute that it transitioned into a color TV show, that must have been like quite a thing to see. I remember back in the day, even watching old reruns of some of these shows, they would start to say, when they make that transition, see the Newlywed Game now in living color, and stuff like that,
Well, back in the 1960s, you had, there were more homes that had black and white TV sets.
Yeah.
In their homes, and and then as color TV started becoming the thing, what I mean?
Yeah.
Where I remember, as a kid hearing, people talking in anticipation about, oh man, I really wish we had enough money to be able to get a color TV, because the color TV was so much more expensive than a black and white TV. And all of these memories are lost. People don't remember any of this stuff. But back in the 1960s, that is the decade of the transition between black and white TV. In the early 60s, it was dominated by black and white, and then, by the time you got to about the mid 60s, now the change is become really evident. And then by the time you're at the late 60s, most of the households had color TVs.
And, I can't really put
Nobody had black and white anymore.
And Gar, I can't really put it into words exactly, but when I was looking for a picture to post on the Facebook page today to announce what we're going to be talking about in today's episode, I came across this cool looking black and white picture of Bob Eubanks, and I was kind of thinking, I'm going to post this picture because it's in black and white. I kind of get what Gar's talking about. I don't know, the fact that it's in black and white kind of gives it like a real historical look, a real historical significance, as opposed if I would have posted just a color photo. I don't know. I can't really put it into words, but it made me think, okay, this show, wow, it goes way back, to 1966 when they were just kind of shooting it in black and white. And I don't know, something about black and white too. I agree with you that it just gives it a real historical look, historical significance. Okay, yeah, this show's got its place in history,
Well, when you go back and you look at a lot of, you'll see when TV shows first started. Bewitched started in black and white.
Yeah.
We could just go down
I
the
Dream
list
of Jeannie.
All these
Gilligan's
shows
Island.
They all started out in black and white, and then by the time the shows had ran their course, they were a full-fledged, color TV show. So this 1960s is the decade of the transition between black and white and color. And
let's before we wrap up today's episode, I want to talk a little more about Bob Eubanks, because I know people often wonder, okay, where did they find this guy Bob Eubanks? And I guess he was originally a radio DJ, like a lot of people that get their start. That's what they did back in the day before they were ever on TV or anything. And So for Bob Eubanks, for years he had a career as a DJ on the radio, and people just would hear this guy's voice, and maybe they listened to one of his radio broadcasts. They thought this guy, not only is he 28 years old and he looks pretty youthful, but he's he can tell jokes and he's pretty funny. I actually came across like an old radio simulcast on YouTube that he did from back in the day, and where he's playing music and just kind of telling jokes in between, and it's kind of interesting. Then you think, okay, so this is a guy that got his start in radio, and then then what he'd go on to really become known for was the Newlywed Game for years. But after he left the Newlywed Game, he did a few other things, like he was a host on Card Shark and a couple other shows. But then I also remember for a number of years, I think it was on Saturday or Sunday each week, he would host in Los Angeles what was called the Family Film Festival. It would come on about 11 or 12 in the morning. He'd play like a 2-hour movie, and in between the commercials, he'd be talking and giving facts, kind of like what we're doing about the movie, And so
that was a thing back in those days.
Yeah.
It was like the 70s, right?
Yeah. 70s and early 80s. And then
oh my gosh, I remember that. That was a thing. There were other people. That's where Elvira came from.
Yeah.
Those type of formats.
Yeah. And then another thing he became known for many, many years after he quit doing the Newlywed Game. He just recently retired, maybe about 10 years ago. Was him and Stephanie Edwards would be the co-host every year of a grand marshal for the Hollywood Christmas Parade. They would
and it just didn't feel like the Hollywood Christmas Parade unless him and both of them were doing it.
See, that's the other thing. See, I need to correct myself. Not the grand marshal. They would be the co-host for.
Yes.
And what's funny is you are exactly right, because I would tune didn't really know who Stephanie Edwards. She did those old, if you remember, the Lucky's grocery market.
Yes,
she would do those.
I remember before anybody even knew who she was.
That's where
she was just doing spot reporting for Channel 11.
Yeah. So that's kind of where she came from. But I don't know what it was about Stephanie Edwards and Bob Eubanks, but they had a real chemistry. And I will tell you, Gar, they have not really found a permanent. They have different hosts each year, and it just hasn't been the same to me. That's another one. I'll tune it in. There's nothing to watch, but that used to be the thing to tune into every year of a Christmas parade with Bob Eubanks and they'd have it on Channel 11 and different. But no, I'm going to watch Channel 5. That's where Bob Eubanks is going to be.
Yeah, it was a tradition, and unfortunately, traditions just can't last forever, and that's just the sad thing.
Yeah.
We all want, we don't want, what we cherish to end.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, the other thing I should point out about Bob Eubanks, again, a guy that got his start on the radio, hosted the Newlywed Game and the Christmas Parade, the Family Film Festival. He's had all this success. He's still alive. He's about 85 or 86, and he looks a lot older, obviously. But as a result of all this, he eventually got, if you can believe, his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which I think he deserves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bob Eubanks, he's one of those, people that was a part of our lives, people, the people from my generation, but he's one of those ones that we hold dear.
Sure.
You know what I mean? He wouldn't hurt a fly.
No.
He's just such a nice guy, and we grew up, watching the show and enjoying his
funny bone, his jokes,
things that he brought, to the show that just made everybody feel warm and at home when they were watching the show.
See, that's the thing too. He was he had a great sense of humor, great comedic timing. I think it was a natural thing for him. It wasn't one of these guys that really had to study and write down his jokes. He was able to do it on the spot, and he, like you said, he was very welcoming. I mean, even when he tells these jokes, he would never do it in a mean way, like where he was kind of clowning on anybody. He was not one of those type of guys, but so warm and loving. Like he came across, like my grandmother used to love to watch him on that show. She said, "Oh, he's such a funny guy. I love watching this guy."
Well, he, for a lot of people, not just your grandma.
No, I know, but I'm just saying,
for legions and legions of people,
fans,
he had that same effect. So your grandma's not alone.
Yeah, and I do think, Gar, eventually we're going to have to do an episode on the dating game. I'm almost going to guarantee, because, another thing that's come up in several of our episodes in reference to the dating game was a little different than the Newlywed Game, because people were mostly competing for a date as opposed to seeing how well you knew your husband or wife that you just recently married. And so there's a little more comedic laughter and banter on the Newlywed Game. So it's a little bit of a different show, obviously, but the dating game too is famous. So we've and we talked about this on a couple of our episodes that's come up. Besides the dating game being great in its own right, at the time we had many people that were not celebrities at the time would go on to have a huge career in Hollywood. People that have appeared on the dating game. I remember Suzanne Summers, John Ritter. I think I remember Tom Selleck. When they were all very young,
The list goes on and on. I mean, there are a ton of people that were on the show
before they were ever famous.
Before they ever became famous.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think there's too many shows in TV history that can kind of say that. It's not like that these people came on because they were even celebrities. Nobody knew who they were at the time. They were just starting to launch their career.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolute must to do it on the dating game. Chuck Barris, ruffled a lot of people's feathers and did a lot of inappropriate things. Yeah. But the bottom line is the success of his show speaks for itself.
Yeah.
The Gong Show. It's considered an icon by today.
I mean,
the Newlywed Show, the dating game. These are all like major success stories. So his work, speaks for itself.
Oh, sure.
But he is also the orchestrator of his own demise.
Yeah.
He created things to be very, very proud of.
Yeah.
But it's really sad to see how it all ended.
Yeah. And the thing with that is, again, I do think we have to do an episode, no doubt, on the dating game for a simple fact, kind of just to wrap up our kind of conversation on the life and times of Chuck Barris, because it is where everything kind of started with the dating game. And like you say, the dating game, the Newlywed Game, the Gong Show, they all got their place in TV history, Gar. And so you can say what you want about the guy, but I dare say that that's his triple threat right there. As they say, the third time's a charm. I mean, three's a charm.
He's got some success to be proud of.
Yeah.
And everything, but I don't think that Chuck Barris is around anymore. But when he was around, I'm sure he was very proud of his successes.
Sure.
I'm sure he wished, in hindsight, that he had done things a little differently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm sure of those things.
In fact, that's part of what we like.
But you can never. Nobody will ever be able to take away
what he accomplished.
His accomplishments.
And that's part of what we hope to do with each episode of A Time Machine. Like in doing this, I learn a lot more. Like I knew he obviously, because he was a producer of a host on the Gong Show. I knew he was behind that, but I had no idea until we even did our episode on the Gong Show that he was also behind the Newlywed Game and the dating game, like you said. So we learn these things, we bring them out, and like you said, nobody is perfect. Gar Chuck Barris, like I said, he had quite a bit of controversy in his life, but his whole life was not controversy. You know what I mean? So I think he definitely deserves to be mentioned. He definitely deserves to have his work kind of praised, because it's very praiseworthy. I will say, and. There are many people today, when they hear the name Chuck Barris, they don't know who the hell we're talking about. But I hope in checking out these episodes,
it's sad to think that he's becoming a lost, faded. The Kinks had a song that they did that I just feel this song is a timeless song, and I highly recommend anyone to go to YouTube and listen to the song. It's a song called Celluloid Heroes.
Okay, I got to check that out.
And it's an absolutely beautiful song. Jason, you got go there and listen to this song. I think of anyone, you will really appreciate that song.
Okay, yeah.
And that's basically what Chuck Barris is now. He's a celluloid hero.
Wow. Well, yeah. Again, though, he's gone, but he will never be forgotten. People like us will have to continue to remind people of his beautiful body of work, and that's what we're here to do. Gar, this has been real fun to do this episode today. Before we wrap it up, I want to let people know next time we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite films, The Rain Man, starring, of course, Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. I tell you, what a pairing of great actors right there.
It's a great movie. It's a great story, and it's got great scenes in it.
Yeah, and we're going to get into it 2 weeks from now. So, Gar, thanks for doing this. You have a great rest of your day, and I'll be talking to you, my friend.
Well, I just wanted to say, give an acknowledgement to anybody that listens to our program. Both Jason and I wholeheartedly appreciate you.
Oh, do we ever? Because we definitely could not do this without you guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care, guys.